What was the reason behind Obama's secret trip to Antarctica? What was the reason for CIA Director James Clapper's simultaneous visit to Australia? Why did Russia's top religious leader go to Antarctica? There has been a virtual media blackout about these highly unusual trips made by officials in Russia and the US. There are a couple of sources that cited Obama traveled to the southern tip of Argentina before crossing the Drake Passage to Antarctica. Indeed, Obama's secret trip comes at a highly unusual time. It follows on the heels of a visit by Patriarch Kirill of Russia. Kirill met with Pope Francis in Havana, Cuba, less than 1 week before he departed for Antarctica. Media sources described the meeting between the two religious leaders as urgent. Nothing like this has happened since the 1054 AD schism that separated Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. Why an urgent meeting between these leaders was called after a millennium of never meeting with one another is a mystery. The mainstream media reported that the meeting between Francis and Kirill was meant to condemn persecution of Christians around the world and to foster ecumenical dialogue. But again, it comes at an unusual time, because 4 days after this meeting, Kirill arrived in Antarctica and performed a religious ceremony blessing the land and water surrounding the continent. He praised the barren lands of Antarctica as, quote, a model of an ideal humanity. Kirill also said the following, quote, Antarctica is the only place where there are no weapons, no military activity, there are no scientific studies focused on the emergence of a new means of destruction. It is a perfect image of humanity and a testimony to the fact that people can live like this. No borders, no weapons, no hostile competition, that they can cooperate and feel as members of one family, unquote. The reason I find Obama and Russian visits to Antarctica very strange is the following. There was another country, another regime, that visited Antarctica just before a Great World War started. The Nazis led an expedition of 33 members, including scientists, to Antarctica, just before the start of World War II in September 1939. Their expedition to New Swabia lasted from December 1938 to February 1939. It is known that the Nazis took thousands of photos using airplanes during this expedition. They also took reels of colored film, which was rare at the time and very expensive to produce. The regime was clearly looking for something in Antarctica. But what was it? What were they there for? Two earlier expeditions to Antarctica by the Nazis were also very alarming. They were intent to map out the terrain of the continent using hot air balloons for aerial footage. The Nazis even attempted, during these two expeditions, to walk across the entire continent and map out its landscape. It's still unclear why they engaged in so much surveying. Let us go back to World War II and listen to an interview given by an American naval officer named Richard Byrd. Byrd was stationed and lived in Antarctica for some time. Byrd made astonishing claims about the continent, that it could be the key to a future controversy that would erupt between various countries, not merely regarding the issue of resources, that precious metals, mineral deposits, and even uranium have been found in Antarctica. No, Richard Byrd seems to suggest that something else was there.
Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this earth that might appeal to adventurous young Americans?
Yes, there is. And not up around the North Pole, because it's getting crowded up there now, because they find out it's really usable, not only to live in, but militarily. But strangely enough, there's left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being. and that's beyond the pole on the other side of the South Pole from Middle America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
This is a tremendous
So
challenge.
there's a lot of adventure left down at the bottom of the world.
Admiral, an expedition to which I believe you're the advisor is now en route. What is that expedition doing?
Well, that's the icebreaker Atka, and it's a reconnaissance expedition. It's going down to the South Pole area to make certain observations and to look for some bases. They will be back in April, and they will report back, and upon the information we get from that undertaking, we will base the bigger expedition that's to follow.
Is that very definitely planned, or is that...
That is being planned right now. So I'm willing to say to you that there will be a number of expeditions that will follow, I think, year after year.
Richard Byrd verified that Antarctica wasn't about resources, but rather that the Nazis had established secret bases for some reason. Perhaps they were protecting something. Operation High Jump, coordinated by Byrd, which included US, Russian, Australian, and British forces, was meant to close in on the Nazis' strange operations in Antarctica. We'll return to Richard Byrd later on in this video. The logo for the Nazis' third expedition to Antarctica shows that they were interested in a particular portion of the continent called New Swabia. You can see on this emblem that there were lines drawn to bring your attention to an exact coordinate, ending on a particular target. Perhaps the Nazis were hiding a secret in plain sight, that they had located something. Were they pointing us, perhaps, to a hole that existed into the earth? A pathway into the center of a hollow earth. There is evidence to suggest that the Nazis believed in the hollow earth and held to an understanding that perhaps there was a passageway to the other side. While hollow earth is not a popular idea these days, it was during World War II. In fact, it was suggested that most of the top Nazi officials believed in a hollow earth concept. Many within Nazi pop culture also believed in a hollow earth, including German writer Karl Neupert. In the book called Between Science and Fiction, The Hollow Earth as Concept and Conceit, the author documents that Neupert began what appeared to be a cult following of hollow earth believers in Germany at the time. The idea was that the earth was shaped like an eyeball, a portal leading into it where the North Pole is located, and another portal leading into it where the South Pole is located. The inner portion of the earth is hollow. Likewise, the eye has an entry where blood is pumped into it, but the actual eye globe is hollow, filled with a substance called vitreous humor to protect it. Toward the end of the eye, a lens is located that resembles a mass of land in an ocean. At the center of this landmass is another hole, the pupil. The strange resemblance between hollow earth and a human eyeball is unmistakable. Antarctica was a point of entry into the very pupil of the earth. Interestingly, many Christians throughout history have held to a view of a hollow earth without realizing it. That's because for many centuries, Christians have viewed hell as a place underneath the crust of the earth, a place of fiery torment where condemned souls go. The Nazis, however, believe the opposite, that perhaps this place inside the earth was not for condemned souls, but a place where the master race, their ancestors, dwelled. Nazi belief in the location of the master race was based on a New Age theosophist who had a profound influence on their philosophy and esotericism. Helena Blavatsky suggested that inner earth was not the place of hell, but a place where the master race lived. Admiral Richard Byrd is arguably one of the most controversial voices on the subject of hollow earth. The truth is that Byrd organized a mission called Operation High Jump to stop Nazi ambitions in Antarctica even after World War II had ended. It was officially classified as a reconnaissance mission, yet several members of Operation High Jump died mysteriously.
Admiral, you make
Do we
this sound a little crowded. Are there that many expeditions now there or en route there?
Well, you know, as I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
This latest expedition now on the way is a government expedition, I take it.
Yes, that's the government. I tell you one reason they're interested. It's by far the most valuable, important place left in the world for science. That's why the scientific groups all over the nation are really interested. But more important than that, it has to do with the future of the nation, those to come after us, or even during your lifetime.
The United States was on a mission to find whatever the Nazis hid in Antarctica. Shortly after Operation High Jump was completed, the United States began to promote the idea that the Earth was a solid ball with maybe a small core of magma, no entry or exit into the inner Earth, no settlements or secret bases underground, no potential escape for the Nazis. This idea came into full force using the US's newly created NASA. Byrd, who had begun to speak out about Hollow Earth towards the end of his life, died approximately 1 year before NASA was launched by the US. Certainly, if this was merely a Nazi claim, with no other substantiating commentary or research, then we could just simply disregard it. But it is a fact that Hollow Earth maps have been drawn for centuries. Famous members of the Illuminati, including Edgar Allan Poe and Jules Verne, alluded to Hollow Earth in their writings, that there was a world underneath the crust that we stand on. One of the most striking affirmations that an opening to another world was identified was made by Richard Byrd himself. Byrd's diary was mysteriously published in 1990 by a company called Inner Light. In the 68-page publication, Byrd suggested that a land existed beyond the pole, where he was stationed for many years around the time of World War II. He made two mysterious bombshell statements in his diary. One was that he was ordered to keep silent about everything he had witnessed in Antarctica, and two, that he had witnessed the land beyond the pole, the center of the great unknown. Let us not forget that thousands of top-secret scientists in Germany seemed to disappear overnight at the end of the war. Some people believe that they escaped to the United States in something called Operation Paperclip, but some others are a bit more suspicious, thinking that perhaps these scientists made a quick exit off of the face of the world, literally, to the hollow reaches of the Earth, perhaps into the very inner quarters and to the location where another race of beings dwell. Did the Nazis go underground when the time came for their demise? And is this now the plan of the elites when World War III begins? Is the route of an escape in Antarctica?
Please open mind. Discern this in all information. Researcher discovers a huge pyramid in Antarctica using satellite images, posted on ancient-code.com. According to Vicente Fuentes, a vivid researcher, there is in fact, at least, one pyramid hidden beneath the vast sheet of ice on Antarctica. This would mean that in the distant past, when Antarctica was much different than it is today, ancient civilizations could have developed on the now frozen continent, leaving behind marvelous constructions, telling the story of a time when our planet was inhabited by different civilizations, at a completely different time, omitted by history and mainstream researchers. Fuentes goes through the main characteristics of the pyramid and other structures that could be located on the vast sheet of ice, making comparisons to the Great Pyramid of Egypt. The idea that there are pyramids hidden at Antarctica goes back several decades. While skeptics remain unconfident, suggesting that these structures are mere natural formations, satellite images and accounts of people traveling there tell a much different story. The idea that these pyramids exist has caused speculation regarding what Antarctica was like in the distant past. Some suggest it wasn't always as cold as it is today, and interestingly, scientific research seems to prove that Antarctica was very different in the distant past. According to a research from 2009, scientists studied the icy continent, collected samples and came across pollen particles in Antarctica suggesting that the ecosystem of Antarctica was very different in the past, pointing that the summer temperature reached around 20 degrees Celsius at one point. In 2012, another team of researchers managed to identify 32 species of bacteria and 2,800-year-old halophile microbes in water samples from Lake Vita in East Antarctica. The permanent surface ice on the lake is the thickest non-glacial ice on Earth. According to researchers, during its long history, Antarctica was located farther north and experienced a tropical or temperate climate, meaning that it was covered in forests, and inhabited by various ancient life forms. What does this mean? Well, given the little we know about the life on our planet in the distant past, it is likely that people lived on this now icy continent and developed as a society just like people did in Africa, Europe, and Asia. Even though this is something considered as unlikely by mainstream scholars, the only way we will know for sure the secrets hidden beneath the ice is by exploring the continent and allowing society to see the results. If we go back to Africa, we know that scholars and Egyptologists have long suspected that the Sphinx is much older than believed, possibly even over 10,000 years old. These theories are supported by the discovery of water erosion on the gigantic Sphinx, which according to scholars tells the story of extreme climate change in the distant past. This means that if the climate in Africa and other parts of the world changed drastically, it is possible that the same thing happened in Antarctica in the distant past. If researchers manage to prove that the pyramids of Antarctica are man-made structures, the discovery could cause a major revision of the history of humanity. But myths and speculation about Terra Australis date back to the antiquity. Around 350 BC, Aristotle wrote in his book, Meteorology, about the Antarctic region. Marinus of Tyre, a Greek geographer, cartographer, and mathematician, used the name in a world map of the 2nd century AD. People believed in the distant past that a landmass called Terra Australis existed, a giant continent located in the southern parts of the planet which was there to provide a balance for the northern lands of Europe, Asia, and North Africa. This idea existed since the times of Ptolemy, the 1st century AD. Thanks for listening and watching. Subscribe and share.
Hour number 2, an historic radio program for you tonight with Jim Mars, Harry Cooper, and remote viewer Dick Allgaier. Well, this remote viewing session really underscores the truth of your book, the reality of the story that Don Angel reported to you. He didn't want to take that with him, obviously, and giving it to you was just an extraordinary event. Jim, anything to pop in here?
Well, for Harry, I'd like to say that I wish I had the time and money to accompany you to Antarctica, because I'd love to go down there and locate Agartha, the Shangri-La that they talked about, that they were preparing for the Führer.
We are able. I think we are able to put this together extremely well. There's things I can't divulge right now. I'm going over to Europe again to next about 3-4 weeks from now. But in addition, one of our members, who's a wonderful, wonderful guy, retired Captain U.S. Navy. He was the executive officer on the submarine that was down there, and I just got an email from him about an hour before airtime. Talks about a warm water lake that they went into with the Senate, etc. So I have to go through it further, but it's just not all Harry Cooper doing this. Harry Cooper is merely the glue that holds all these people together, and they all have a piece of the puzzle. And it's just incredible when you start opening all the doors.
This is nothing new. This goes back to 1938 when there was a huge German expedition that went down to Antarctica.
I sent you that video, didn't I, Jim? You got it, didn't you?
I think so.
Yeah, you got to look at that.
They planted all the flags.
Yeah, but they show still pictures of some of these, and I mean gigantic caverns underground. They're just huge.
Well, bear in mind, I went to that island off of Rio, about 1,000 clicks out in the Atlantic, South Atlantic there, the island Trinidad, not to be confused with Trinidad. And this is where that expedition laid over for a while. That island is owned by Brazil, and they've had a naval contingent there forever. And their whole job is to raise the flag in the morning and say we own 200 miles of fishing around here and retire the colors at night. It's not a military garrison like you would imagine, guns and stuff. No, it's just people there and doing some experiments. So 1938, the Brazil Navy pulled all their people off the island, and 1 week later, the expedition under the flagship Schwabenland arrived. They built. Look at the website sharkhunters.com and go to previous tours, and then click Brazil. They built 2 80-meter tall radio towers. I was in the remains of one of the radio shacks, and then in 1941, the Germans pulled their people off. The Brazil Navy put their people back on. There's a little memorial. There's a picture of that little memorial. It's a handmade memorial, a painted rock with other painted rocks that spell out 1941. Then in 1945, July, the Brazil Navy pulled their people off the island again, and a German contingent came down. This is 3 months after the war ended. One of the German sailors was killed in an accident, and we found this giant rock that had 717 painted on it, weathered all to heck, and we assumed that meant he was killed on the 17th of July. This island was instrumental because it just loaded with freshwater streams and creeks, and it had large herds of pigs and goats and wild turtles. So when a ship would come by on its way to Argentina, they could pull in there, refill their fresh water, and okay, I almost used the word I used back in the Mafia days. They would clip a bunch of pigs and butcher them. I'm sorry, that's the word. And and then continue. And the Germans were there at least 2 years after the war ended. We know for sure.
Well, hey, Harry, with that installation, wouldn't that have been a perfect retransmission station to transmit messages from Europe through there on into Antarctica?
I can't imagine any other reason for them 80-meter tall radio towers. There's pictures of them on my website too.
Yeah, we've seen when we've been on tour with Harry in the past on these expeditions, we've seen so many photographs, and they're all in the archives. You can find them all at sharkhunters.com too. Okay, let's jump over to Dick now and tell us what we're going to see on this really remarkable documentary production that I was very honored to be able to participate in.
Well, we see me describing the death in the bunker, someone actually getting shot. But if you want to see what goes through a remote viewer's mind, you can watch that clip, and something is not right about it. I keep saying that it's an act. It's a drama. I got the sense that someone was really killed, but someone wasn't right about it. It was play acting. It was a real death, but it was there as a staged thing, which makes sense. I also perceived that there was a delegation came, there was some meeting, people met, some agreement was made, and a leader was told, the guy in charge was told, well, you're going to do this, and he wasn't happy about it. So here's my question for Harry Cooper and for Jim Mars. If we believe that Hitler was allowed to escape, was he allowed or was he given safe passage? Was technology transferred? Was there a formal agreement? How did this happen? Did he just scoot away without the Allies knowing it, and then they just agreed to not chase him? Or did a delegation go and they made a formal face-to-face agreement in the middle of the war?
A trade for technology. Trade for technology.
Yeah.
How did it work? Yeah.
Yeah, how did they meet face-to-face?
A TV journalist because you asked about 43 questions there in one question. According to Don Angel, Hitler and Eva Braun were forcibly drugged because Bormann wanted to keep the Reich alive, which he did, but he needed a figurehead. But once they got down to Argentina, he found he didn't need Hitler, so Hitler was just allowed to live out his life quietly in Bariloche, which incidentally has been visited by 4 different presidents, American presidents, during their presidency that we know of for sure: Eisenhower, Carter, Clinton, and just recently Mr. Potato.
They might as well have gone to Antarctica. I mean, that's just out of the way. What's the reason that Eisenhower would have gone to Bariloche in 54 or 60, whenever he went?
1960.
60.
Yeah. So, according to Don Angel, this is what happened. Now, we know that the only operating Ju-390, the big 6-engine, the one they called the truck, we know it was at the air base of Schweidnitz, which I think was on the border of Romania. It flew out, and it went to Norway, which was the only part of the German forces that had not been conquered, and they were just, the war was over, so they were just waiting for the Brits or the Americans or somebody to come and scoop them up, which took 3 months. And so the plane landed there. It was painted in Swedish Air Force colors, light blue, and it flew down nonstop. This thing had an incredible range. Flew down nonstop and landed on a road or on an estancia, a ranch in Uruguay, and was immediately disassembled and the parts all thrown away. When I was there just this past February, we were interviewing a lot of old people that lived there, Germans. I don't speak Spanish, but I get along fine with my German down there. And this lady was sitting there, older lady. She doesn't know anything. She heard about it. She doesn't know nothing. But no, there was no Nazis down here. And the lady had 3 swastikas tattooed on her forearm. So that's how he got down there. And then he went to live in Bariloche, which is a beautiful place. But we can go, we can use up another 2 whole hours on that.
Yeah, on the cover of Harry's book is a color photograph of the beautiful home, Bavarian style, built by the Mercedes family in Bariloche that Hitler apparently lived in.
And,
yeah,
we got to thank Jeff for helping design that cover.
That story of Don Angel telling about being on the U-boat with Martin Bormann was one of the best stories I've ever read. I read that book, and that is just about being in that cramped, stinky U-boat, and Don Angel didn't like being in U-boats, and Martin Bormann was not a nice guy. There are just touches in there that you can just tell it. She's telling that it's a real story. There's so much detail. It's a great story.
Yeah, he got along with Bormann as much as he had to, but like you say, Bormann was hard to get along with, and that one exchange where the captain of the U-boat got angry with Don Angel and gave him an ass chewing, and then Bormann stood him up and reminded him that if he insulted Don Angel again, it would be the same as insulting the leader of the Third Reich, which was Bormann at that time. And he said, "Do I need to remind you of the consequences of insulting the Fuhrer?"
Wow.
Which I think meant Schutzki.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Quite a story.
It was an interesting book to work on. I loved every minute of it, and the thing I like about it most, it's absolutely accurate, right on the button.
Well, the scenario I can see that fits with everything we know, everything I know anyway, and with Dick's remote viewing, is that Dick, the sequence you talked about where somebody who obviously knew Hitler and came to him, and I don't think you used the term whisper in his ear, but he was there, and they had a private conversation, and that was apparently kind of the turning point. That's why in your remote viewing, I think you turned to that. In my scenario, I would say that was Bormann, his chief of staff, who had full access to him. In fact, that's how he got to be so powerful, is that acting as chief of staff, it was Bormann who could decide who talked to Hitler and who didn't, and what they told Hitler and what they didn't. And he was pretty well run in the show, especially after the summer of 44. But I think it was Bormann who had made a deal at the highest levels of international banking and commerce, who then stepped to Hitler in a private conversation and said, "Mein Führer, I'm sorry, but we're going to lose the war. And I think you need to start making preparations to leave." And Hitler probably said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go down with the ship." And that's probably when Martin Bormann decided, well, we'll just whisk him out of here, drug him, and take him anyway. And I think the deal was cut at that level between possibly through Allen Dulles, possibly through John J. McCloy, who was CEO of National City Bank in the 30s, and they were the largest lenders of money to the Nazi government. And good friends with the head of ABS, head of the German Central Bank, and I think that at that level they said, "Okay, look, the war's going to be gone. Let's carve up Germany. We'll all get our fingers in the pie, and America needs we need the nuclear technology so we can end the war with Japan." And I think that's where the deal was cut. And they would tell Hitler, "Look, if you don't do this, all of Germany is going to be a wasteland, and you have to do it, mein Führer." And I think that's what turned him. He felt betrayed. He felt bitter. And the thing that stuck with me, Dick, is when you said he knew he had to do this. He didn't want to do it, but he had to do it. Okay? So obviously there was extreme leverage on him. And I think that was it. It was either you go along with this or your beloved Germany will be totally destroyed.
It damn near was, but yeah. Very interesting.
Devastated, but it sure sprang back well.
Yeah, well, you said something. Harry Cooper said something. He said, here's this man, make Germany great again. Sounds like a familiar political statement, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. What goes around comes around.
When we look at the bird expedition known as Operation High Jump, and then we look at that film I finally found and got to you, and I also sent it to Jim, the 1938-39 German expedition to Antarctica, and you look at some of the still pictures in there of these gigantic underground, not under the snow and ice, underground caverns. I mean, these things are huge. And you think about that, and you know what thought came to me, Harry?
What's that?
The thought was, wow, and then what didn't they show us that they found down there?
Yeah. And we have, we've been told that it's very difficult to get, get to places we need down there. But as you know, in my understanding of the German language, Eingang verboten means Harry's welcome here.
That's right.
But we have already gotten the green light from several of the governing agencies down there. So we're not going to have any problem with the authorities. We're not going to have to outrun the police. We've been promised cooperation from several of these entities, and we've got stuff that I can't even mention just yet.
Right. If anybody out there is listening who knows anyone who was involved with Operation High Jump, and there's some of those men are still alive. There were about 5,000 plus of them in Admiral Byrd's transports and his aircraft carrier and all that. They went down there, and they met a very unpleasant welcome. And Operation High Jump, look it up, do your research, folks. It's Admiral Byrd got his tail kicked, and he left. Something's down there, and I'm not sure that Harry Cooper will be able to find that, but he's going looking, and it may be time that be investigated fully. When you look at that film, I should post it again, and look at the caverns there that are completely weather resistant. There are no icebergs inside these caverns, no frozen. They're habitable. And what could have been built there from 1938-39 to 1944-45, they could have sent a whole lot of transport ships down there with a whole lot of building material and done some remarkable things. All right, we got to wrap this up. Dick, what do you want to add here as a final word or two? If I can point you again to the top of Rense.com, we're talking about the poster of the documentary. You see right there what really happened to Adolf Hitler, remote viewing the death of the Fuhrer.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best remote viewing documentaries that honestly shows real remote viewing. It's Jeff Rentz helped write it and produce it. He's the narrator, and anything is good with Jim Mars in it. Jim Mars providing commentary. The link is there, and I think it's worth watching. And it's just been so interesting to get feedback. As a remote viewer, you often crave feedback because you stand there and you don't know. I don't know why I wrote nuclear stuff. I don't know why I drew a guy anonymously buried in a, and it's interesting for me to hear it from the guy who knows, and that's Harry Cooper. So it's been an interesting show. Thank you so much, guys, for helping out.
You got it. Harry, anything you want to add here? This is really an extraordinary subject, and I think we are now getting further confirmation of your long and dedicated work to bring historical truth to all of us.
It's been an interesting evening for me. I learned a lot, and I think shows like this, where you have several people like Dick and Jim and myself to get point counterpoint and to embellish and to reinforce what each person has learned, I think this is one of your better shows.
Well, it's great because of you folks. And James, you've been watching this story, as it were, for a lot of years. This all, like the JFK with the reverse speech, it all kind of gels. It all flows together.
And it substantiates my little motto, okay, which is basically none of us are as smart as all of us.